Atheism here at the beautiful Royal Institution Theatre. Thank you all for being here on a Friday night as well. We were overwhelmed with the interest in this event. We sold out in just a few weeks, and it's great to see.
So what you can see here is that the person who is introducing the event just mentioned that all seats are sold. He's making some jokes now and things, and the debate is between two atheists and two believers in Christ. And let's see how that's gonna pan out. It's gonna surprise you.
With the greatest conceivable mustache, it's Alex O'Connor. And last but certainly not least, finely tuned in logic and looks, is Professor Philip Goff. So we've set ourselves an enormous task with some of the biggest questions in all of philosophy and science. We're going to be discussing where the universe came from, why it's finely tuned for our existence, and what the point of it all is, what the purpose of life is more generally. To my right, we have two people representing traditional theism or Christianity, and to my left, we have those who are opposed to that view in some shape or form. So I'm between God and atheism, perhaps. Between a rock and a hard place. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to begin tonight by just giving an overview of the story of the world and our place within it. Then we're going to move on to critiques of atheism and have our atheists defend their worldviews before moving over to atheists and vice versa, and seeing if we need to carve out new alternative concepts of God along the way. So, Rowan, I'd like to begin with you. I'm going to give you the big question right away. What's the point of us existing?
In 3 minutes and not more. As a Christian, my starting point is that we exist because the most fundamental form of activity, energy, call it what you like, that is there is love. That is, it's a willingness that the other should be. The world exists because God desires there be an other. And so love is fundamental to that. And so our point in being here is to receive that, to realize it step by step, day by day, to grow into what is possible for us with all the help we can get, frankly. That means two things which I think perhaps need saying when we're talking about faith and whatever faith isn't. First, it's not as though God is a kind of extra item in the universe who might or might not be there. God is as present in the universe as Bach is in the St. Matthew Passion or Beethoven in a symphony. It's that energy, that shaping energy, which makes it what it is, but it's not a thing within it. And sadly, both religious people and not so religious people often think that religion is just believing there's one more thing in the universe than others think. Not that. Second thing, though, is that for me, it's absolutely basic to understanding where I'm coming from as a believing person, to think that belief is an enhancement, an enlargement of what it is to be human, which is where not only the hope and the discipline that I try to live in makes sense, but also gives shape and purpose to how I look at the world around me, both the human and the non-human world, to see what it is that can be done here and now by me to enrich the life of what's around me, to help the life that's around me become itself more life-giving, which is the ethical responsibility that I have as a believer and the responsibility I have also to the whole of the created order. So that's where I'd start, I think.
Oh, great. Philip, let's go over to you next. What's the best explanation for why we're here and what's the purpose of us being here?
Right. Well, I think many in the West feel they face a choice. Either you have to believe in the very traditional idea of God as all-knowing, all-powerful, perfectly good, or you're a secular atheist, right? It's like, whose side are you on, Richard Dawkins or the Pope? Make your mind up, quickly. And I've come to think that actually both sides of this never-ending debate have something right and something wrong. Right? Traditional believers struggle to explain the horrible suffering we find in the world. Why would an all-powerful, loving God choose to create us through the horrific process of evolution by natural selection? But there are also things atheism struggles to explain. For example, the fine-tuning of physics for life, the surprising discovery of recent decades that for life to be possible, many numbers in physics had to fall in a certain very narrow range in such a way that it's incredibly improbable that our universe would have got the right numbers by chance. So we're in this situation where the believers are tying themselves up in knots trying to explain suffering. The atheists are tying themselves up in knots trying to explain fine-tuning, when in fact, there are middle ground options that can elegantly account for both of these data points. Consider, for example, the hypothesis of a God of limited power, a God who's made the best universe they can. Maybe God simply can't create complex life in an instant. Maybe the only way God can create intelligent life is by creating a universe with the right physics that is eventually going to evolve intelligent life. And God's like, I'm sorry, I know it's going to be messy. This is all I can do, is this or nothing. I think this hypothesis can account for both the fine-tuning in terms of God's purposes and the suffering in terms of God's limitations. I really believe this is where the evidence is pointing, and I suspect it's biases on both sides that are stopping us seeing that. Now, finally, you might think this doesn't seem to fit with the religions that have traditionally dominated the West. Well, I've come to think that this God of limited powers hypothesis fits quite well with a certain slightly heretical version of Christianity. A version of Christianity where God isn't interested in finding someone to punish for our sins. Rather, God is focused on unifying herself with the universe, bringing God and the universe into a state of deep, intimate unity. I've recently argued that this form of Christianity fits with modern science and liberal values and can make good sense of the meaning and purpose of our lives. So I'm someone who for 30 years thought Christianity was a load of bollocks. But sometimes when you look at the same thing from a slightly different perspective, it could start to make a lot more sense. And that's what I found recently with this slightly unusual form of Christianity.
What are you doing? You're supposed to be atheists for Christians?
This has all happened since you invited me, sorry. Sorry. Letting down the atheist side.
Don't worry, I haven't become an atheist.
That was a balanced out. Big news, Archbishop.
Big news.
Should I give an example of fine-tuning, just in case people are not familiar with this? One of the most discussed examples is dark energy, the force that powers the accelerating expansion of the universe. And on our current theories, if that force had been a little bit stronger, everything would have shot apart so quickly, no two particles would have ever met. So you wouldn't have stars, planets, any kind of structural complexity. Whereas if it had been a little bit weaker, it wouldn't have counteracted gravity. Everything would have collapsed back on itself a split second after the Big Bang. So for life to be possible, that number had to be like Goldilocks porridge, right? Not too strong, not too weak, just right. And there are many numbers like this. So I think in our standard ways of understanding evidence, with something called Bayes' theorem, and our standard ways of understanding evidence, this is evidence for some kind of goal-directedness in the early universe. And I honestly think, I'll come to those points in a moment, but I honestly think we're in denial about this as a society. I think it's a little bit like when we first got evidence that we're not in the center of the universe. And people struggled to accept it because it didn't fit with the picture of the universe they got used to. And now we scoff at those people, those stupid religious people. Why didn't they just follow the evidence? But I think every generation absorbs a worldview it can't see beyond. And I think something like that's going on with fine-tuning at the moment. One thing Alex said about fine-tuning is you said, oh, it's a problem that will be solved. I don't think it's a problem that will be solved. It's in our normal ways of thinking about evidence. It is evidence for some kind of goal-directedness in the early universe. Now, maybe the evidence will change, you know? Maybe the evidence will change. Maybe future physics won't have any fine-tuning. Maybe future physics will have more fine-tuning. All you can do is work with the evidence you have. And it's the definition of a bias to say, I'm going to ignore the evidence we currently have. But so I think we do need to take this evidence seriously. I was interested by the thought that the agnostic interpretation, I'd have to think more about that. The other objection, very finally, about why is God working within these narrow constraints? Well, maybe that's a worry for traditional theism. But if we're going for a God of limited powers, that would be my understanding of, you know, the limitations of the designer. So the designer is only able to create from a singularity, is only able to create physics with a certain form, and is created the conditions for life within those constraints. So I agree with Alex that suffering rules out an omnigod. That's fine, but we've got to take fine-tuning seriously. So that ought to lead us to some non-traditional theistic hypothesis.
But what is what is yours?
Well,
where does Christ come into your sort of Christianity?
So I
briefly, if possible, rather than giving this. Just
how much do we go into this? I embrace a form of Christianity which is very close in spirit to the way the Eastern Orthodox Church understand what the Jesus stuff was all about, which is essentially that the point of existence is for God and the universe to come into a state of deep organic unity. Maybe what Jesus was getting at with the metaphor of the vine and the branches. That kind of deep, intimate relationship. But there's a problem. We're a bit different to God, right? God's the immaterial, timeless source of everything. We're just sort of temporal, contingent beings. So they kind of don't fit together. And so the solution to this is God becoming a bit more like us, taking on a physical nature, sharing in our form of existence so that we can share in God's form of existence.
And you believe he actually did that?
And this closes
in
the
Jesus
gap.
of Nazareth?
Yeah, absolutely. So this isn't the ultra-liberal Christianity of like, oh, Jesus was just was a great moral teacher. And, you know, this is, reality was transformed. God and the universe came together in some quite unique way in this moment.
Okay.
Very close to the Eastern Orthodox Church, but fits really well with this God of limited powers view, which I think is very well evidenced.
So your argument is that we need to take into account this argument from fine-tuning. Christianity needs to evolve in line with, you know, what physics teaches us, right? And you think that somehow this will...
And our modern moral understanding. I think it's a development in our moral understanding that it's just inconceivable that a loving, all-powerful God would create a universe like this. I treat the New Testament as a historical document, but I think it's a damn good historical document, particularly the genuine letters of Paul, which are extraordinary by the standards of modern evidence. Sorry, by the standards of ancient history. So I think we just have to make our best judgment as to what was being conveyed there. The way I think of Christianity is that in the person of Jesus, God and us and the universe came together in a unique and unparalleled way. So as I say, this is not the ultra-liberal form of Christianity where Jesus was just sort of another enlightened person or something. That would be the core of it for me, I suppose, that God and the universe came into an intimate relationship in that moment.
Okay, a question from up in the heavens.
Philip, do you think that the anthropic principle supports or undermines your hypothesis for a God of limited powers?
So the anthropic principle, I suppose, is sometimes given as a response to fine-tuning, right? We couldn't have experienced a universe that wasn't fine-tuned. So it's almost kind of inevitable that we're going to experience a universe that isn't fine-tuned. There's a great response to this with an analogy by John Leslie of a firing squad analogy. So imagine, sorry, I've got a terrible cough. Imagine you're going to be executed by 5 expert marksmen, and they all load up and they all miss. And they load up again and they all miss. And you think, this is a bit weird. And they keep loading up and keep missing and keep missing. And you think, something's going on here, this needs explaining. But you might think, well, this doesn't need explaining, because if they'd hit me, I wouldn't be here to observe, so I shouldn't be surprised that they'd miss me. Something seems to have gone wrong there, right? Even though you wouldn't have existed if you'd been shot, it still needs explaining how come these expert marksmen keep missing, right? Maybe it's a fake execution. Likewise, yeah, we couldn't, if the universe hadn't had these exact right numbers for life, we wouldn't be around. So what? It's still incredibly improbable that you get the right numbers for life, and so it needs explaining.